Hello, hello. How's everyone doing today? Can everybody hear me? I think I'm live. Yep. All right, got some thumbs up. Awesome. Good to see everybody. Good evening, Teresa from South Africa. I guess this new daytime works out better for everybody in Europe and the other side of the world. What time is it in Australia? Anybody knows? Hmm, Canada. Hey, Dora. Detroit, Tennessee, Oregon, Reading, Pennsylvania. So it's 7:30, 19:30 in South Africa. What time is it in Australia? I guess it's or New Zealand. What time is it in New Zealand? I guess it would be 4:30 a.m. Oh my goodness. Oh wow. So I probably need to come on at like 2:30 in the morning to get Australia and New Zealand during the day there, which I'm not opposed to doing that. I'll do that at some point. But Illinois. Hey, so I posted on Telegram that I anybody from Illinois. So if you're on there and you responded to me by email, um, I almost got sent there for work. I was supposed to be there tomorrow, but they ended up canceling it for me. So that was a great blessing. Not that I'm opposed to going to Illinois. I just, I just got home. I didn't want to have to turn around and leave again. So uh, Japan. Oh my goodness. Well, thank you guys. If you're from on the other side of the world and you're up in the middle of the night listening to me, I appreciate it. Uh, well, the conference again was a great time. I met a lot of great people there. Um, I I'm going to hold off on my doing my conference slides just yet because I want to wait till my bandwidth. I'm getting my internet upgraded on the 26th, and once I do that, I will be able to get onto a better third-party streaming platform, and then I can do my slides and I can talk through my slides and show them to you at the same time that way. So um, right now they're just on PDF. I don't know that it does it any justice necessarily that me just talking through it like that way. But for the moderators, thank you guys for being on. If you have questions, just throw them on the Telegram channel. And let's see. Somebody was from, they said the armpit of the South. What did they say? Alabama. I lived in Southern Alabama for a year, and we called it LA just for Lower Alabama. Uh, First time I ever ate boiled peanuts was in um, near Dothan, Alabama. I saw it there, and I was like, "Wow, what is this?" And then I fell in love with them. They're awesome. Okay, well, for those who come back to LA, love to. I mean, Alabama is a beautiful state. Arkansas is a beautiful state. Lots of parts of Missouri are beautiful. Lots of part of Kentucky are beautiful. West Virginia. I mean, I love the South, and but I also love the West too. Like Idaho is gorgeous. Montana. I mean, Wyoming. I fell in love with Wyoming going out there. Colorado. So there's just there's a lot of parts of the United States that I think is awesome to live in if I could live there. Come to Illinois, steak dinner on me, dude. John, I will if I ever come to Illinois, I'll definitely keep that in mind. Kind of looking at doing some maybe some conference or some Bible prophecy speaking thing in Mississippi here in the not too distant future. So I'm hoping uh, I'm hoping to make it to Mississippi. We still got Australia, New Zealand in February. I talked to Tom Hughes the other day, and so his wife's going to call me tomorrow and give me the travel arrangements and how they're doing it. And then just it's just getting the money together to buy the ticket and get all that stuff set up. So Fort Polk is the yeah, I agree. Fort Polk is the armpit of the South. Spent some time there. Osmouse, good to see you, Pete. Read your article a little while ago. I agree, very good. Yeah, so I want to talk about that article that I just wrote. Uh, it's called Equivocation, and it's something that was in my mind last week. I don't know that I really got to speak to it a whole lot because at the time things were still so new and things were moving so rapidly and so quickly that I wasn't sure how it was going to play out necessarily. Um, but one of the things that's intrigued me about all that's happened here in the last week is the Biden administration's response to Israel in providing so much military support. I think there's like two carrier groups in the area, or maybe like three. I know there's one in the Persian Gulf, and then there was the president or the Ford, what's his name? I forget that whatever the president Ford's first name is, but that carrier group's there now in the Mediterranean. And I think they were moving another one. The Eisenhower was coming from the East Coast over there, and it's interesting to me to see them do this complete 180 in supporting Israel. Gerald Ford, thank you. Um, and so I hopefully if you've read the article, I'll post it. I'll put it in the link, the show notes or whatever, so that people can just go there if they haven't read it yet. But I was looking more, I guess, to motivations and how these motivations of why political groups do what they do. On the surface, it seems, very altruistic, if you will, for the Democrats to all of a sudden be pro-Israel. Um, and I began to kind of sort through that. Why would they do this kind of thing in the article itself? And I kind of list out some bullet points. So I want to talk through some of that. Um, and so I start off and I just said, don't think for a minute that Democrats and the establishment DC Beltway types, and that includes the rhinos, the neocons, and deep staters, have all of a sudden become moved by the atrocities done to Israel by Hamas. Um, if you go back even to the Clinton years, beginning with the Oslo Accords, I mean, you could technically go back to the Camp David Accords in '77 under Carter and start to see this ludicrous land for peace deal that just doesn't make any sense. And I included that map on there for this reason, because you look how small Israel is, um, and you're asking them to give up more of their land, and somehow that's going to make it, bring peace in the Middle East. That is, it's completely, it defies common sense on every level. So for it to have been a thing that we've lived through for the past 40 years is mind-boggling. Um, but Democrat, I can say the U.S. political establishment altogether has been moving slowly, kind of anti-Israel, and maybe not necessarily anti-Israel, but indifferent to Israel. There's an indifference growing, at least within the Republican side as well, in part due to this idea of isolation, that we need to worry about our own problems. And we have a lot of problems in the United States, but we don't need to be doing these military adventures anywhere else anymore for the foreseeable future. And on the Democrat side, the Democrats are like all in to like support Israel with military equipment, weapons, ammunitions, uh, or munitions, aid, all of that other stuff, even boots on the ground kind of stuff. And now the Republicans are like, well, we don't want to get involved in this. This is, this smells like the beginning of World War III. And so there's this divide starting to happen, and it's really bizarre. And I think that one of the things I was trying to get to is this idea that the Democrat Party, this is the party of, jailing January 6th protesters. They are the party of abortion on demand, anytime up to and including after the birth of a child. They are pro-Islamic all the way in so many different areas. They are radical in so many different areas. Um, they are Marxist in their ideology, and they're not ignorant of the fact that Marxism never works. It's never worked anywhere it's been tried, and it's been responsible for the deaths of upwards of 100 million people over the 20th century. How are they all of a sudden doing this kind of complete flip on Israel, who they've for the last 40 years have been trying to divide Israel like religiously, trying to divide them up even to even smaller sections so that Israel can't defend itself? How are they all of a sudden becoming Israel's champions and the Republicans who traditionally have been, because they've been, largely, I don't want to say all Republicans are Christians, but most Christians have been Republicans here in the last, at least since the Reagan era. And it's, just because of the social differences that the political platforms, what they champion, are diametrically, on the Democrat side, they're diametrically opposed to, basic biblical Christianity in most areas. And on the Republican side, it's not necessarily pro Christianity, but at least it's not anti Christian in a lot of ways. So I think that this is the left or the Democrats' attempt to divide the Republican base, and separate the America First kind of folks from their, traditional Republicans who uh, who aren't, who maybe they were never Trumpers, or they were not crazy about Trump necessarily. Kind of the middle of the road Republicans who want just things to go back to the way they were, kind of the status quo. And it seems like this divide is working, and that's where I think that this is why it's, there's something to the motivations behind why the Biden administration, and really when I say the Biden administration, I really mean Obama's third administration, because he was never, a friend of Israel. In fact, when I think, if I remember correctly, when Netanyahu came to the White House under Obama, he had to come in the back way. He had to come in through, like some back entrance. It wasn't even, it was like he did not want anybody to know that he met with him. And I remember he kept him waiting for a couple hours while they were eating dinner. I mean, it's just like really just kind of petty, stuff, rude stuff that you wouldn't treat um, your worst enemy to, but this is now the same party that's all of a sudden coming to their aid. There seems to be something sketchy there. There's something rotten in Denmark, if I can say it that way. And so um, I began to like trying to wrap my mind around what do the Democrats gain in doing this? And in my investigation into this, I've come up with basically four areas where I think that they see themselves gaining politically in this endeavor by supporting Israel. The first one is obviously to splinter the MAGA Republicans from its Christian base. And so they know two things, right? They know, first of all, that Christians, for the most part, across any denomination, are, and I'm going to use this very loosely, are generally pro-Israel, right? I know that that's changing, and that the tide is turning within Christendom, at least in the West, about being pro-Israel versus being pro-Palestinian. And then the second thing they know is that conservatives will not rally behind these um, endless wars, these endless unwinnable wars. They don't want to do this Afghanistan thing again. They don't want to do a Vietnam again. They don't want to do these things. They want to, if we're going to fight a war, we're going to fight it to win it, that kind of thing. And so I think they're working on that splintering, that division right there between these two different groups. You have a large group within Republican politics who are Christian and pro-Israel, and then you have another large group that are not interested in any way getting involved in this conflict, despite how atrocious Hamas has acted, despite the barbarism, despite all that. They just don't think it's our problem, and they don't think it's something that we need to get involved in. And so I'm starting to hear that rhetoric a lot from conservative pundits and speaking heads within the conservative movements that I respect greatly. Tucker Carlson, the folks at Redacted, Tim Pool, um, Scott Adams. I'm sure there are others that I listed on there that are generally they're conservative, or at the very least they're very libertarian, and they believe in a lot of the things that I believe in terms of social issues. Now we're starting to get this divide over Israel, and it's vexing me. I don't know how to put it any other way. I'm vexed by this attitude that I'm seeing, because the minute that I hear any of these folks start to justify, not saying that they're justifying what Hamas has done, they are attempting to justify the motivation behind what Hamas has done. They're not justifying the barbarism, but they're justifying the anger that underlies all that as being something that where both sides are at fault. Where they're trying to make it sound like that Israel's been right sometimes and Islam's been right sometimes, and they've both been wrong sometimes. No, this has never been about that. It's never been about land. It's never been about um, um, land for peace or any of that stuff. This has only ever been about driving the Jews into the sea and erasing Israel from the pages of history. That's what this has been about since um, 1947. As soon as the United Nations voted to separate, I mean, we could even go back to the Balfour Declaration or the San Remo Conference. It's been that anti-Jewish, anti-Zionist sentiment within the Arab world has been stirred up since then. And this is unfortunately the most egregious and horrific example of this. So much so that the Jews today are not even comparing this to Yom Kippur. They are in the sense of their declaration of war, but the atrocities are so horrific that they're comparing it to the Holocaust. And after the Holocaust, what was the thing they said? They said never again, never again. And so I think that we're seeing Israel now united in a way that we've probably not seen in our lifetimes. Unless if you remember 1948, then maybe then. But other than that, I can't think of a time when they've been more united across political party, across religious differences, across social and cultural differences. I mean, the Israelis are pissed. They are pissed. They're angry, and I believe it's a righteous anger. And I'll include here as well in the article. I'll put on the link for the Glenn Beck show that I watched. And I'm not a huge Glenn Beck guy, but I thought he did a good job on talking about this particular issue. And it's moving. Like it is. If you can watch that and not be impacted emotionally, then I would question the fact that you have a heart or you have a soul, because the videos that he includes that's embedded in his is just, it is just, man, it it's hard to put into words. I can't, as a father, I can't even fathom having to deal with this. Um, yeah, Glenn Beck's a Mormon, and I don't agree with him on a lot of issues. But I think in this particular instance, he's one of the few conservative pundits that really get it, that really understand the what we're really facing here. This is not political. It's not land. It's not even cultural necessarily. It's good versus evil. And this is we're looking at the example of pure, unadulterated evil that was perpetrated by Hamas against a largely civilian population. And you're right, Samantha. It is absolutely spiritual. And I think that's where the conservative side, and those that I mentioned in the article, this is where they're getting it wrong. They're only looking at it from a very kind of geopolitical standpoint. They are not looking at it with spiritual eyes, and they are not looking at this. They definitely are not looking at this from a biblical or historical perspective. There's a guy, Stephen Gardner, who I've watched for about a little over a year now on he does a lot of he's doing a lot of programs on Ukraine, and he has a pretty good insight into that stuff. And I kind of got to the point where I was going to him if I wanted to get some insight, or whoever the guest he had on talking about particular issues with the Russia Ukraine war. And he had on a guy just recently called Max Blumenthal, who just I just wanted to vomit. I was watching this thing, I was like, are you serious? This guy, you know he says he's a Jew. I don't know, I guess he lives in New York or something. He sounds I guess he's a leftist Democrat, something. But he's going through the whole talking points of how the Palestinians were uprooted from their land, and just going through all the nonsensical talking points that the media often goes to, which are not historical in any form or fashion. Um, and Stephen's just letting him go on, and he's not pushing back on anything. And I'm just thinking, like, really, dude? Like, they had 40 babies beheaded, and you're trying to justify uh, this anger that Hamas has. Hamas exists for one particular reason, and that is to destroy and eradicate the Jewish people in the nation of Israel. Period. It's not about liberation. They're not even liberating their own people. They haven't had elections since they came to power in 2007. Their people live in squalor. Their leadership doesn't even live in Gaza. The leadership lives in Qatar, and they live in high-rise hotels. I mean, they're living the life over there, and basically they're making these Palestinians go over there and do all the dirty work and fight and die for a cause that they know is not winnable. And as I said at the last program, um, there is no such thing as a Palestinian. There is no such thing. If you go back to any of the newspapers, Google the newspaper headlines for Israel, or for Israel prior to 1964, probably. Um, Anytime there was a riot, anytime there was some kind of uprising or strife or whatever, it was always between the Arabs and the Jews. That's all it said: Arabs and Jews. This idea that Palestinian was its own separate thing did not exist until Yasser Arafat created the Palestinian Liberation Organization. And that was in 64, I think. Maybe this started to gain some headway in 67. But um, prior to Israel becoming a nation state in 1948, they were under the British mandate. So you had the Arab side and you had the Jewish side, I guess, which was partitioned, right? And then that went back until 1918, when at the end of World War One, that's when the British took it over. And during that whole 20-year period there, you either had Palestinian Jews or you had Palestinian Arabs. And they were only Palestinian in the sense that the area of the Ottoman Empire where they lived. It was not its own thing. It was not its own ethnicity necessarily. And then if you go back from 1918 all the way back to the 1500s, that was all the Ottoman Turk Empire. All of that belonged to the Ottoman Turks. There was, again, it was Palestine, and only in the sense of that's the area that it was designated as, just like Greece was designated as a Greece area, or Cyprus, or some other parts of the lands there had different, Syria and things like that, but they weren't their own people. Um, so before the Ottoman Empire, you had the various Muslim dynasties that came and went. You had the Crusaders were there for a couple hundred years, and going all the way back to the Byzantines. The Byzantines controlled that area for a long time, and then the Roman Empire, and then you had the Jewish state itself. So there's never been a separate ethnic Palestinian people. There's been no Palestinian kings that you could go back to and say he was the king of Palestine, blah 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 blah. A crusader might have taken on that title, but he was a white European guy. There was no separate thing. They didn't have their own currency. They didn't have their own culture. They're Arabs. They're Arabs. They're Egyptians. They're Jordanians. They're different amalgamations of people that are rolled up under this made up title called Palestinian, right? Much in the same way that Al Qaeda was. You couldn't say that Al Qaeda is its own ethnicity. Al Qaeda was a conglomeration of terrorist fighters from all different, different sections of the Muslim world. Some came from Europe, some came from the Stan countries, all the former Soviet satellite nations. Some came from Egypt, some came from Saudi Arabia, some came from Jordan, Libya, so on. Al Qaeda is not its own ethnicity. Hamas is not its own ethnicity. Palestinian is, if I say Palestinian, it simply represents a Texan, or represents a region like Texas, right? I'm from Texas, but I'm not ethnically a Texan, right? I can't there's no such thing as an ethnic Texan. So, anyways, I'm rabbit trailing here. Um, so we know that the Democrats were very much in favor of splitting Christians from the MAGA or America First Republican side or conservative side of the movement. We know since the invasion of Russia, there's been this nonstop cheerleading from the left, from the mainstream media, from rhinos, neocons, etc., um, to perpetuate this war in Ukraine, eh, in a way that doesn't make any sense. We're not going to put boots on the ground there without risking World War III, and that would be World War III right there. Um, but at the same time, they use that as a way to um, build up the military industrial complex, who then funnels money back to the Democratic Party. It's all this kind of big money laundering process between these organizations. We know that political conservatives, independents, libertarians, MAGA, Christians, Christian evangelicals, and so for the most part, we've not been supportive of this Ukraine conflict. The last time I heard, there was probably in the neighborhood of 400,000 Ukrainians that have been killed, mostly men fighting in this unwinnable war against Russia. I don't even know how many Russians have died on this side, and how many innocent civilians have been caught in the crossfire between the two. But a safe estimate is to say about 500,000 people have died in this conflict that we, the United States, have been funding and perpetuating and instigating and championing for who knows why. I mean, there's a lot of different reasons, but we're doing this to supposedly break the Russians, and the Russians are stronger now than they were at the beginning of it. Um, we know that under Barack Obama and Joe Biden, they spent since at least 2015 funding these anti-Netanyahu political groups, action groups, to destabilize Netanyahu's government. And I think upwards of $500,000 that we spent, I mean the government, U.S. government, spent trying to get Netanyahu out of office. So it doesn't make any sense now that we're now, and that was just getting Netanyahu out. Think about the money that's been spent here recently in the last 10 months, where they've been trying to um, encourage all these riots and protests against the judicial reform there in Israel. That money didn't, I mean, that's not all spontaneous. Somebody's paying these guys to do that. Somebody's funding this lawlessness to happen over there. We know that at present, Trump is still the lead Republican in the field. It's likely he'll win the primary without any real serious challenge. And I think that despite the um, investigations against him and the lawsuits against him by these attorney generals in Georgia and New York, and all the other hurdles he's having to go through right now, it still seems like he is going to be, at least the way I see it, is he's going to be the presumptive nominee and probably win the 2024 election, unless there's some really shady stuff that happens between on election night. And the problem with that is that the left showed all their cards. They played all their cards in 2020. They broke so many rules, and just they didn't care at the time. They didn't think they would ever have to deal with this again, and now here it is again. And it looks like they played all the cards, and so everybody's kind of wise to the tricks and the things that they're doing. So I would be very surprised if any ballot counts go. They're not going to let them shut down for the night and then come back the next morning and recount, and then all of a sudden there's mysteriously hundreds of thousands of ballots that just showed up. We're not going to do that again. I can't see any state um, in good conscience allow that to happen again, with the exception of maybe California. And then the last thing here is that this is what makes what's happened with Hamas versus Israel so intangibly delicious to the Democrat side. Um, so think about it this way: they've been championing this war in Ukraine that nobody wants to get behind because they see it as it's a sinkhole, if I could put it that way. We're sinking money and lives and all this stuff into an unwinnable situation, and nobody really understands what we're trying to achieve there. And Americans, for the most part, are not behind it. But now Israel gets attacked, and it's in such a horrific way that now the Christians are all on board with supporting this. I mean, the Democrats just flip from that to this, and they see this as their winning ticket. But either way, they're going to divide the Republican base, or fracture it to some degree. So that's point number one. Point number two was they're going to control, or try to control, how Israel fights this war. By overwhelming them with so much aid, support, and all this stuff, they feel like they now are, um, that Israel would be beholden to them, and eventually they'll let the ground invasion go on for like a week or so. Then, about after a week, they're going to really start to try and put the pressure on Israel to sue for peace or do some kind of negotiated peace deal. And so Israel's not going to do that, and that's going to cause this huge division between. But they think the more they put into it, the more control they're going to be able to extract out over how this plays out. And a recent example is how U.S. pressured Israel to do the humanitarian corridor, to give the Gazans a few more days to move south. But that also gives Hamas time to dig in and to do whatever they're going to do in preparation of the ground invasion. So I think that's in part some of what we're seeing here. Um, and the Democrats will ride this pony until election if it benefits them, and if it doesn't benefit them, then they'll drop it like a hot rock. I mean, they're going to play this. They're going to play this out until Israel says, "Hey, we're not stopping this ground invasion. We're going to keep going until Hamas is completely eradicated." And I think that at that point, there may be some the honeymoon may be over with between Biden and Israel, or I mean, Biden. The third point was that if we look at what's the big picture kind of view of this, why would Iran presumably give Hamas the green light to do what they did? And it seems like Iran wants to prevent the Abraham Accords from gaining any more momentum, and they're really into fracturing the Israel-Arab normalization process that began under Trump. So it seems like, from a big picture view, this is an attempt to keep the Middle East fractured and to get everybody hyper focused on Israel, both Sunni and Shia, and to keep them as the common enemy and take the focus off of them. Obviously, it seems like the Democrats are kind of on board with that, given the fact that Biden just released $6 billion, or unfroze that for the Iranian government. And we know that under Obama that he also was releasing, I think, 400 million that they sent over to Iran on pallets in the middle of the night. Pallets of, I think it was $400 million they sent over there to Iran. That I guess that they had kept frozen for a while, and that money was used to fund all kinds of bad stuff. So, yeah, that's kind of the gist for that. In as Democrats, lean very Marxist in their ideology, they've obviously adopted this idea of divide and conquer. So they want to keep the Republican and conservative party fractured and broken apart and fighting amongst ourselves. And I think a lot of ways too, they like that in the world, the Middle East and other places, because we seem to be doing things under Democrat government leadership that is bent on destabilizing places. Obama went over to Egypt and gave a speech in 2009, and next thing you know, the Arab Spring kicks off, and they overthrow Hosni Mubarak. We know a couple years later that the U.S. was involved in getting Gaddafi overthrown and killed under Clinton. The 13 soldiers that were trapped over there are left behind. We know that Syria, we've kept that place in shambles ever since we got involved there. We've Ukraine, the same thing. They were going to suit. They were going to come to a peace agreement about a year ago between Zelensky and the Russians, and the U.S. completely torpedoed that, and so that peace deal never went through. And so it's this. Democrats seem very focused on keeping every place destabilized, largely because they're getting big payoffs from the military industrial complex, who makes money by creating weapons and weapon planes and tanks and all this other stuff that they can use to if there was peace had broken out everywhere, the military industrial complex would collapse, right? And they don't want to collapse. They are very much invested in keeping their power, the same as Democrats. So this is one hand washing the other kind of thing between those two groups. The same thing that Eisenhower warned against back in his farewell speech in '61, I believe, was allowing these big mega corporations, international, transnational corporations, from becoming so powerful that they began to dictate what's going on in the world. And then the fourth part was the policy of weaponizing immigration. And so if you're a Democrat and you're all about global government, you're all about the Great Reset, you're all about the 17 Sustainable Development Goals from the United Nations, you're all about hating on America, hating America's history. We are the worst thing that's ever happened to the world, kind of thing. You hate capitalism. How do you break the system down? And the first guy that I'd ever heard talk about this was Glenn Beck, and this was 2010, I think, 2009, when he first started. I guess when he discovered the Cloward and Piven strategy of overwhelming the system, and you create so much social problems that the system eventually collapses within. And so this has been translated into destabilizing a country so that it creates this refugee class that goes to another country, and that other country now becomes overwhelmed by this refugees, and then that begins to collapse that country, and it just kind of spirals out of control from there, right? And Europe is in the same problem right now. They're taking all these refugees from Africa, from the Middle East, and it's completely upended their cultures there. And now they're protesting and rioting in France and in Germany and other places, Sweden. And so it this whole thing has to it centers around this idea of removing national sovereignty. And once a country can no longer control what's going on inside of it because of people flowing in from another place, that problem becomes transnational in nature and thus requires somebody above them to help out. And this is where I think this idea of regional government comes into play. Most people aren't on board necessarily with um, a one world government. If you talk to anybody, they're not really about that. But I don't think they really think that much or care or have any kind of strong opinion about regional governments. And when you talk to people about, let's just say you talk to a random person on the street and you say, "Do you support a one world government?" They're going to be like, "No, I don't. I don't. I think that's crazy." Blah blah blah. But if you say, "Well, what do you think about NAFTA?" And they're like, "Mm, I don't know. It's not really impacted me, in any real way, even though, you're basically creating some kind of a regional economic structure through that. Or, there's all sorts of regional economic alliances these days all around the world. There's economic and political and military alliances that are cropping up all over the place. So I think that when you weaponize immigration and you use that as a tool to destabilize a country, what you're doing in effect is removing that nation's ability to govern itself, and thus it depends on a larger superstructure like the United Nations or some larger body to come in and assist. And then at that point, you're not really your own country anymore necessarily, because you're beholden to somebody else to kind of tell you what to do. So it's kind of the yeah, I put it in the article, but it's kind of the same way when the United States gets it. If you get too deep into America's pockets, and I think a lot of our allies and partners have come to realize over the last few decades, it's kind of like getting in deep with the loan sharks or getting in deep with the mafia. It's like it's not a good place to be, because we begin to dictate everything to you, and if you don't follow what we tell you, then we're going to take you out, or there's going to be regime change. There's going to be something. It's not going to bode well for you. So, all right. So I mentioned the splintering that was happening within the Republican side of the political spectrum in America between, I call them MAGA Republicans and just your run of the mill, kind of middle of the road Republicans. Um, and that fracturing is going to take place over Israel, because a lot of you've noticed that at least in the conservative side, the tent has gotten a lot bigger. We're bringing in more people because they see how bad it is under Democrat leadership. We're bringing in people that probably disagree on cultural things and religious things, but they are, vehemently supportive of like the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, and things like that. So, it's a big tent. It's getting bigger, and the problem is that when it gets too big, the left is just going to use something to divide us over. And I think that is the perfect scenario for them is Israel. And we know a couple of things too, that going forward, um, by the time that we get to the Ezekiel 38-39 war, the Battle of Gog and Magog, that the United States is not anywhere in the picture. We're not, we're not in this scenario at all. So that leads me to believe that something happens to us between now and then. And I had some quotes here from Anthony Blinken, who was the Secretary of State. I'm quoting from MSN. He says, "We will always be there by your side." The second quote is when he's reaffirming U.S. commitment amid the ongoing war with terror group Hamas. Secretary of State Blinken said that U.S. stands with Israel today, tomorrow, and every day as it defends its people and its shared values. And that was in another article. And then the last one was, quote, "The message I bring to Israel is this: you may be strong enough on your own to defend yourself, but as long as America exists, you will never have to." And he said that while he was standing next to Netanyahu. And to me, there's a little bit of hubris in that, maybe a lot, to think that it reminds me very much of the guy. I can't remember the congressman's name. I think it was Tom Daschle, who said right after 9/11, he basically quoted, and this is what Jonathan Cahn did his book on. Um, I'm blanking on the name of the book, but he said that we're going to rebuild. We'll be back stronger, and la 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 la. And he was basically quoting a passage from Scripture, what the enemies of Israel said, and they end up becoming wiped out. Harbinger, thank you. And it is it's almost a foreshadowing, if I could say it that way, to say that as long as we're here, we're always going to be by your side. And again, when you go back to Ezekiel 38, 39, they're all alone. So that to me leads me to believe that something something takes us out of the way or takes us out of the equation. So um, let's see what else. There is a sentiment within the conservative side that they're using this idea of not the idea of America first, but they're using the idea that the United States it's this is not our fight. It's not worth our blood, sweat, and tears to be involved in. And they point to things that this administration has done and previous ones have done, and they have a healthy degree of skepticism. And I can't say, I mean, if I wasn't a Christian and I was looking at this from an outsider's perspective, I would think they're probably right because we could look at what Biden's done in Ukraine, we could look at what Obama did in the Middle East with the Arab Spring, and so on and so forth, and going on back, even the Bushes, invading Iraq when had literally nothing to do with 9/11. It was all Saudi Arabia, or mostly Saudi Arabia, and yet we did nothing to Saudi Arabia. Um, it's this kind of wag the dog thing, and I don't know that. Uh, I don't think that they're completely wrong necessarily in having a healthy degree of skepticism, given the fact that the Bidens have just been all over this, and really, I mean, from the get-go, they've been 100% supportive of Israel. And I know that this won't last, this full support of everything Israel wants to do, and it's going to come with strings attached. But it just seems like um, they are forgetting something. These conservative side, they're forgetting this idea. First, again, this is not geopolitical. This is not a land for peace. This is not about liberating an oppressed indigenous people. This is evil. And God created governments. He created human governance in Genesis 9 as a means to prevent uh, wholesale evil from rising up and just taking over the world. Um, you know, Were we justified in World War II in taking out the Third Reich? Absolutely. Were we justified in taking out Emperor Hirohito's Japanese militaristic desire to conquer all of Asia? Absolutely. Um, Governments are used for a force of good, and but by no stretch am I saying that governments are perfect or anything like that. I'm not saying that. In a lot of cases, governments are in themselves the problem. What I mean is that there's checks and balances that got put into the world after the flood, so that that evil could not just take over and control the entire planet. And secondly, we're supposed to be, if you read Romans 13, we're supposed to be subordinate to our government, and we know that not all governments act on our best behalf or on our benefit on behalf of us. Most governments are in the business of staying in power to keep that power going. And there's, at least in the United States, there's proper ways that the Constitution has allowed for us to um, combat that rising totalitarianism or rising evil within a government. We have those checks and balances as well. So, but reading Genesis 12, this is where these conservative guys are really kind of missing the point here. And the Lord said to Abram, "Get out of your country, from your house, and from your father's house to a land that I will show you. I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse him who curses you. And in all the families of the earth shall you be blessed." And I think that when we stand with Israel, that God will bless this nation. I'm not saying that we're perfect or that we are or that everything Israel does is perfect. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that when we go into this with good motives and we stand with them as the only Jewish state in the world, um, and I think it's heartfelt that we honestly feel like, they have a right to exist and live in their own land and not have to worry about being attacked every other day. I think that that's a good thing, and I guess I'm happy, and I'm not dismissing what the Biden administration has done up until this point with regard to Israel. I just think that they're not doing it for the right motivations, and I think there's going to be strings attached to it that will somewhere down the road here is going to come to try and trip up Israel, and that's what I don't like about what's going on necessarily. Um, I guess the last part in this is kind of where does this all go? And I know that like Amir Tsarfati does not believe this is Psalm 83. I think he's the minority position in that. I think most people either have one of two thought processes. One, it's an imprecatory prayer. I think Andy Woods and probably some others hold to that position. And then the other side of it, that Psalm 83 is a prophetic um, conflict that has yet to play out. And I think like Bill Salas and others hold to that position. I tend to lean that direction because of how significant this is. Again, the only thing that kind of rivals this in terms of the atrocities committed, the only thing that rivals this is the Holocaust. And they haven't declared a war in 50 years. They've declared a war. I mean, um, this is something that I think is going to escalate into a much bigger, larger conflict um, than simply something simply between Gaza and Israel. I think as Israel begins the ground invasion, it's going to motivate the West Bank to rise up. I think it's going to motivate um, Hezbollah to act up. I mean, because if if Israel does what they say they're going to do and change the face of the Middle East, obviously that's not something that Iran's willing to settle with. And so they may even attack Iran in terms of taking out their nuclear capabilities or some other type of capabilities. So I think this is going to turn into a Psalm 83 type scenario. Um, from there, I think that sets the stage for an Isaiah 17 situation, particularly as Hezbollah gets involved in this. And they've already declared that northern border as a military border in terms of, excuse me, as in terms of being a like a hot zone, if you will. Um, in one of the things in the Psalm 83 conflict, if I can back up a little bit, it lists all the people groups in there, right? It lists all the different peoples by their ancient tribes, and Bill Salas has done the legwork on figuring out who all these people groups are nowadays, like based on where they live. Um, like Edom, being where Jordan is now, parts of Jordan and the Moabites and so on and so forth. Um, and I read through that last week, and I think the idea that since Palestinian is a made up eth- ethnic term or whatever, that they, under that umbrella, could encapsulate all of those people in simply Gaza itself. You've got Arabs, Egyptians, you got all these different groups in there that now call themselves Palestinians. Yasser Arafat was Egyptian. Yeah, you know what I mean? Like, so you could have those groups all encapsulated within just Gaza and Hamas and Islamic Jihad and these groups. But I still think that this is going to expand into a broader area to include Judea and Samaria, the northern border with Hezbollah in Lebanon, and then possibly even as far as Iran and some of those places that we probably don't even know about, maybe Qatar and others. So um, I think this will expand. I think this will probably lead to an Isaiah 17 situation. And then from there, I think that paves the way for Ezekiel 38, 39. Obviously, if we take out, or if the Israelis take out Damascus and they take out, they hit Israel or hit Iran really hard, that is plenty of motivation right there, then and there, bring this coalition together. And you see the Taliban in Afghanistan, of all places, chomping at the bit to join into the fight. And they're flush with $900 billion worth of American weapons and equipment that we left behind. So um, I think all they're asking for is safe passage to get over there to fight, and they may not uh, they may not be in this particular fight, but obviously we know that they're part of that coalition of the Gog and Magog. So I think that what we're starting to see now is going to be um, the speeding up in both intensity and frequency of uh, Israel's conflicts going forward. So that's why I believe this is Psalm 83. I don't know how to call it any other name. It really, it's going to be that to that level. All right. Let's see what else. I think that was it on that article. Obviously, we don't like. I don't like to see people get killed. I don't like to see people get hurt or homes destroyed or any of these other things. I think as Christians, I think it's incumbent upon us to pray for the leadership of Israel, pray for them to have wisdom and discernment in going forward and how to navigate this very complex scenario that they're facing. I mean, urban combat is the worst form of warfare that there is because of um, the inherent nature of that kind of fight. I mean, think back to when the U.S. was taking Fallujah or Ramadi. Um, it's incredibly difficult to fight inside of urban areas. Um, you got underground tunnels, you got high rises, you got people in buildings, booby traps. You got, I mean, everything that you can think of is in that scenario, and it's incredibly dangerous. So pray for the leadership of Israel. Pray for the soldiers going into that. I would, pray for civilians on all sides to not be harmed in this. Obviously, you know, the goal, not the goal, but the end state is that that God works all things towards His to good and to His glory, and that through this that souls might be saved. And that people will start to turn to Christ as the only real solution to these problems. So when we pray for the peace of Jerusalem, like it instructs us to in the Bible, what we're really praying for, I believe, is for Jesus to come back and to rule and reign from Jerusalem and govern the whole world under His kingdom. And I think that that's at that point, that's the only time there's going to be true peace in the world, to include Jerusalem. So, I think also pray for the churches here in America to wake up. I had a guy today at the gym this morning ask me, a guy from the church I go to, um, what um, what was going on in Israel, and this is a guy that I would never have thought would even. This is not something. This is not in his wheelhouse. He doesn't. This isn't the things he thinks about or talks about. And even then, he was asking me about it, and I began to share with him kind of what I'm sharing with you guys now in a much more abbreviated fashion, I guess. But um, I pray that Christians in America wake up. I pray that you give us discernment here in America and not just America, but in Europe and in Australia and New Zealand and other places, South Africa, for Christians to recognize the prophetic significance of this, and that going forward, that God would give us discernment like at no other time, because we're entering this time when deception is running rampant, and fake news, I mean, just the whole spectrum of everything is getting turned on its head. So for discernment for ourselves, for our families, for our churches, and if I think Amir Tsarfati has listed some agencies on his website that I guess he's vetted, but or Erick Stakelbeck's another good source, and I think he's partnered with There's an organization there. I can't remember the name of it, but it's on his Erick Stakelbeck's Watchman channel on YouTube. But if you feel inclined to support them financially or donate clothes, whatever, I don't know what they're asking for, but I would ask you to consider that as well, because uh, if this turns out to what we think it's going to turn out, Israel's going to need our help. significantly. And I'm not talking about the U.S. government's help. I mean, just average Americans. And to a fault, we're very generous people. Um, and Israel is definitely in need of our support, both spiritually and materially as well. Okay, last thing. Questions. Let me pull these up here. It's 1:30 now, and I have till about 2:15 or so to go before I have to get ready to get my kids from school and stuff. So, um, okay, this comes from Val Halloran. Pete, what do you think about those who say Netanyahu was complicit in the attack? I don't think he was complicit personally. Just kind of, I've been following Netanyahu for a number of years, both when he was in it and out of office. Um, I think he spoke at a church in the 90s that I was at. Um, I think it was the 90s, maybe 99 or something. I got invited to a church and he was speaking there. And that's kind of the first time I really, you know, learned who he was. And he wasn't prime minister at the time. Um, but I don't think he was complicit in the attack. And I agree with Amir Tsarfati on that this, I don't think that this was necessarily an inside job. Um, and I guess after all this is said and done, there will be the investigations and all that will kind of come to bear. I kind of think in part that this was an over reliance on the uh, IDF side, maybe the just the average Israeli to trust the system that they had in terms of the barriers and the borders and the technology and all the stuff that they put in place to prevent something like this from happening. Maybe it was an over reliance on that. Their guard was down. It was right after right after the feast day. Um, you know, multiple failures in much the same way that 9/11 was failures at all different levels. We knew this. We know now that the CIA and the FBI and all these groups were tracking these individuals that were part of 9/11. They just hadn't talked to each other, and there was no crosstalk and no correlation as to what they were going to do ultimately. But there was knowledge that these guys were here in America and they were planning something. They just didn't know what. Now I know a lot of people um, will take a much more conspiratorial aspect to 9/11. I am not by any stretch of the imagination defending U.S. Foreknowledge or um, I'm not trying to defend why Building 7 collapsed or none of that. I'm just saying that prior to 9/11, the U.S. did have knowledge that these guys were in the country. Um, but what at least it seems like the different agencies weren't talking to each other. So nobody really knew. They only knew bits and pieces that they knew, and they weren't cross talking with these other agencies um, to kind of see what the big picture was. And that maybe that's the same way with what happened in Israel as well. I don't think that unless if this were an inside job, this would have to be somebody that hates Israel so much that they would be completely on board with allowing something this horrific to happen. And I don't know. I have a hard time seeing that. But I guess we'll find out in the end here as things flesh themselves out. Essie Bach asks Pete, "What are we here in the U.S. supposed to do daily other than pray and spread the gospel? This existent is unbearable." I think I mentioned earlier that there are agencies. I would probably find. You have to excuse all the dogs in the background. I'll give him a second. Gotta love dogs. Anytime the garage door goes up, man, they're just going nuts. Okay, there are agencies. I would probably look at the ones uh, that are vetted uh, through Amir's Sarfati or Behold Israel. You could probably go to beholdisrael.org and see those agencies that he recommends. He has a much better understanding of those agencies and where they, what they do, and whether they're, going to actually help people or they're just going to line pockets or something. So Amir Tsarfati and Erick Stakelbeck has uh, groups that they've partnered with that provide resources to people there in Israel in all manners, food, clothing, equipment, all sorts of things that they need. So I would look through them. If I can find the sources, I will definitely link them at the bottom of my article and on here. Um, Lisa asked, how long do you think before we are attacked here at home in the US? Well, I'd heard through the grapevine that it was supposed to happen last week and it didn't happen. So I'm not really sure, but I would not be surprised if it between now and the election and something like this happens to us. To what scale, I don't know, but I think that something is definitely going to come before the next election cycle. So I think these are kind of things that are like spigots. We allow these things to happen if it benefits us or it benefits the party in power, and not every party, but some parties seem willing to use this to their advantage. Like Rahm Emanuel said, never let a good crisis go to waste. Natalia asked, can you be called back to active duty? Yep, I could. I looked on my, I've been called back once for COVID. So eTalent asked, Pete, been reading Zephaniah, seems pretty relevant. Thoughts? I would agree. Zephaniah is definitely one of those books that makes sense now. And the same with Zechariah as well, in terms of what we're seeing today and the hatred against Israel. Um, but ultimately, we know where this all ends. And probably could probably say the same with Obadiah. Son of none, Pete, what are your thoughts on Israel dropping its guard on purpose and allowing this atrocity? Again, I don't know that it was on purpose necessarily. I think that they had built such a defensive perimeter on that section of the border there that I think there was an over reliance on their technology and on the system in place. I don't know. Again, I can't make excuses for why they didn't react sooner or how it happened in the first place, how Mossad let this happen. I mean, Mossad's one of the best intelligence agencies in the world, so how they didn't see this coming. Again, this will all be fleshed out afterwards. I think right now they're kind of singularly focused on eradicating Hamas and eradicating any threats in the future going forward. So, um, did we really expect 19 guys to take over planes with box cutters? And again, this is a hot topic too, because if you listen to Alex Jones and others, they think they have sources that say that people in the planes were gassed, and I don't know. I don't know. Um, it's been 20 years since 9/11. There's still a ton of questions that people have that I have. So it's hard to speculate on that stuff, but uh, ready now. Your thoughts. Do you think if there were hackers involved in the security system, played a loop recording that would have shown on video like bank robberies and movies? I thought of that, and I thought of hackers, and absolutely, I think hackers is a definite potential in this. And we know there's a couple of things we do know about Hamas and the actions leading up to this. We know that there was, to some degree, training done by the Russians, and it may not have been the Russian government per se, but organizations within Russia that were or are sympathetic to the Palestinian cause and or the Hamas cause, and help them to plan and to execute this. And there are cyber groups in Russia that even since have come out afterwards and are conducting hacks on Israel as we speak. So um, I guess that question kind of, it was one of the things that I looked at in my book Hobo, where I was it's my wife. uh, where they were. You want to drop that in? Oh, sorry, I have this against the thing, so the dogs don't push it open. You have a lunch? Yeah. Oh. 1,000 people. Uh-uh. Yeah, I don't know. I have to keep the cage against the door because the dogs will push their way in, and then you'll just hear dogs snoring and all sorts of other things. So yeah, my wife's smoking hot. Oh gosh, where was I? Um, oh. So in my book, Hobo, I think volume two, I was playing out the Gog Magog scenario, and I'm like, well, how can this massive army amass in the north of Israel without Israel knowing it? And it was kind of some scenario like that where their systems were hacked and they were kind of blind up there. And so that's where this whole thing kind of, in my story, that's the only way I could um, see that playing out. Somehow Israel is blinded to the threat to the north, and I couldn't imagine this massive army coming against Israel and them not knowing it. At least that's what the passage in Ezekiel 38 leads me to believe, that they're caught by surprise. In much the same way here, how did they allow this thing to happen? Um, Again, they were caught unawares. I think in a sense, they had an over reliance on their technology, on their security offenses, on the systems that they had in place. Probably played some part of it. Another part of it was that during COVID, people began to lose their weapons. Israel has really strict gun laws there, and so people weren't allowed to have personal firearms. And there was one case, I listened to a guy last night saying that because, and I can't remember where I heard this. Anyways, he didn't have his COVID vaccine card or something like that. Anyways, they came and took his weapon. And I think that this is going to be completely reversed now within in Israel, where they may not mandate that everybody has a weapon, but they're definitely going to make it much easier for people to have their own firearms in their house, and to be a well-armed society. So, your thought on Albert Pike's World War letter? I know who Albert Pike is. He was a 33rd degree Freemason. He wrote, I think, something Doctrine and Dogma or something. I don't know, something to do with Freemasonry, but I don't know if I'm familiar with this letter. Um, Bima, if you can send it to me or send me a link to it or post a link here, I'll definitely look at it. Um, Speaking of Bima, I'll have Bima on. I guess we'll do some interview at some point here. But let me get my internet up to speed, and then I can do the third party platform kind of thing, and then I can start bringing guests back on and doing slides and all that other stuff. So looking forward to that though, Bima. And Aldo asks, can you please look at Isaiah 11? What? Isaiah 11. This is a chapter that I've looked at a lot in regards to proof text that Israel would be resurrected as a nation again, but also I think it also begins with the idea that they're going to be the head of nations. There shall come forth a rod from the stem of Jesse, and a branch shall grow out of his roots. The Spirit of the Lord shall rest upon him, the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counsel and might, the Spirit of knowledge and of the fear of the Lord. His delight is the fear of the Lord, and he shall not judge by sight or his eyes, nor decide by the hearing of his ears, but with righteousness he shall judge the poor and decide with equity the meek of the earth. He shall strike the earth with the rod of his mouth, and with his breath his lips he shall slay the wicked. Righteousness shall be the belt of his loins, and faithfulness the belt of his waist. The wolf shall dwell with the lamb. The leopard shall lie down with the young goat. The calf and the young lion and the fatling together, and the little child shall lead them. And the cow and the bear shall graze, and the young ones shall lie down together. Their young ones shall lie down together, and the lion shall eat straw like the ox. The nursing child shall play by the cobra's hole, and the weaned child shall put his hand in the viper's den. And they shall not hurt or destroy in all my holy mountain, for the earth shall be full of the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the seas. And in that day there shall be the root of Jesse, who shall stand as a banner to the people. The Gentiles shall seek him, and his resting place shall be glorious. Now, here's a passage that I look at in terms of proof texting that Israel will be here. That 1948 was not a fluke; it was not an accident; it was intentional. In verse 11, it says, "It shall come to pass in that day that the Lord shall set his hand again the second time to recover the remnant of his people who are left from Assyria and Egypt, from Pathros and Cush and Elam and Shinar, from Hamath and the islands of the sea." The first time Israel was conquered and displaced was under the Babylonian captivity. Now, obviously, as well as I kind of lumped that in with the Assyrian part too, where the northern kingdom was taken by Assyria, and then the southern was taken by Babylon in 605 BC, and they came back as a people in what was it, 530 BC, somewhere around there. Cyrus, the Persian king, allowed them to go back to their land and begin rebuilding their temple. We know that by the time of Nehemiah goes back to rebuild. He gets sent. Artaxerxes, the Persian king, allows him to go back to rebuild the city and the walls. And then they'd been their own people up until really the Romans came and conquered them again a second time in 70 A.D. Well, the and there's kind of a two-parter on that as well, because in 135 AD, Emperor Hadrian came in and salted the ground and completely kicked every Jew out. They weren't allowed to go into Jerusalem anymore, except for the only day of the year they were allowed to go in was on Tish B'Av. And then he's the one that renamed the area Syria Palestina after the ancient enemies of the Israelites, the Philistines. So um, the second time that they were dispersed was the Romans, and then the second time they were recovered is 1948. There's been no other time, so there's not going to be a third time as well. This is it. This is Israel's rebirth, is the key prophetic event that signals that we're in the last moments of the last days. So let's see. Although I don't know if that answers, I don't know if there was a question in that, but that's the first part of that chapter is really dealing with the millennial kingdom once Christ is ruling and reigning, and the natural order of the world is going to be at peace with each other. Bears and lions and wolves will be able to dwell peacefully with like goats and lambs and fatlings, and they're just going to they're going to coexist peacefully in this kingdom, in the kingdom age to come. Chris asks, what is a good response to those saying Israel and the Palestinians have both done wrong years prior to the attack? That in my article I address that, but really that's kind of the argument that people are starting to make now, that both sides are at fault, and I'm sorry, there's no way to justify what Hamas has just done, because Israel hasn't done that to them. And in one of the interviews I saw, I think it was on BBC or one of those British channels, the host keeps talking about saying that Israel should respond um, proportionally, and the guy was like, What's your hang up with this word proportionally? If you want us to behave proportionally, then we should go in there, behead their babies, rape their women, then kill them, and start killing all the civilians, execution style, house to house. Like, if you want that to be proportionate to what they did to us, that's what that would require. But our response is going to be disproportionate in the sense of taking Hamas out as an organization forever, and anybody that's been enabling them or helping them, they're also a target. So, uh, I guess the response is that, uh, first of all, this whole uh, idea that that the Jews came in and displaced the Palestinians is nonsensical to start with, because one, uh, there wasn't anybody hardly there. Um, if you go back, I quoted and numerous times Mark Twain. When Mark Twain went through Israel, the land of Israel, back in 1867, I think, and he wrote about it in his book called The Innocents Abroad. He said there was nobody there. They hadn't run into a single person at hardly anywhere. And then if you go a little further down the line, a couple of years down the line, that whole area belonged to the Ottoman Turks. That whole region was part of the Turkish kingdom, the Turkish Ottomans kingdom there. No, there was no such thing as Palestinians as their own people group. They've never been in their own people group. You had Palestinian Arabs and you had Palestinian Jews, because they just were called that because they lived in the area, but there's not a ethnicity of Palestinian. So that was all weaponized in the 1960s under Yasser Arafat, under the guidance of the Soviet Union. He taught Yasser Arafat how to win the narrative war, how to win it through propaganda, because he knew that the Yasser knew that they couldn't beat the Jews militarily. They'd already tried a couple of times, and it wasn't working. Um, and so they began to shift their tactics and how they were going to fight Israel, and that was through the narrative, through public sentiment. And they've been, far more successful at that than they have with anything else. Um, the fact that you have leftists here in the United States and progressives who, on one hand, will wave the rainbow flag, and the other hand, free Palestine, not realizing it. Maybe they know it, or they just, I assume they don't know it. But you don't have LGBTQ plus AI, et cetera, in Gaza. They throw you off the roof. They will take you and throw you off the roof. They don't care. They are not progressive like and that is what's this so maddening about all this. It's this blindness that is put on Democrats and progressives, and I would even say establishment type people. There is no peace with them. Their existence um, is an absolutist totalitarian system, and they do not want to coexist with you. They want to, if you're not them, they're going to destroy you. So that's the first part of it. The second of it is that Israel was attacked in the 6 Day War. They were attacked. They were the beleaguered ones, and they fought back and won. Uh, or excuse me, in that was in the Yom Kippur War, where they were attacked from all sides, kind of unsuspected. And the 6 Day War, it was a preemptive one where they saw the enemy massing on their borders, the Egyptians and the Jordanians, and they did a preemptive strike to prevent them from being overrun. And you got to remember that people in the 1960s, at least in the 6 Day War, many of them had come out of the Holocaust, and their whole mantra then and even now is never again. We're never going to allow this to happen again. And so the horrors of World War II was still very fresh on their minds then. But the wars that they won through conquest after being attacked. And so even the land that they won fair and square in a military conflict, like the Sinai Peninsula, they gave back to the Egyptians to manage and kind of make it a barrier between them and Egypt. And so uh, they've been playing by the rules for the most part. And again, I'm not saying they're perfect. I'm just saying that if you're gonna, we can't justify what Hamas has done by any past rights or wrongs that's gone on between the nations going back to 1948, because Israel's never done anything like that to any of their neighbors. Um, I can't even think of any time they've done that in the last 2,000 years. Yeah, you'd have to go back to the biblical times of the first century where the Jews were kind of harassing Paul and then the apostles, and they killed James, Jesus' brother, by throwing him off the temple. There was that form of persecution back then, but nothing like Hamas has done recently. Um, there is really no excuse for that. They're evil. They deserve to be wiped out every bit as much as the Third Reich does. Uh, um, every bit as much as the Third Reich should have been wiped out, and they were. Um, there's no place for them. There's no place for ISIS. There's no place for these groups that kill so wantingly, and not only just kill, but they live stream it, and they send it to the family member. I mean, it's like horrible. It is absolutely horrible. Beheading babies, shooting children, taking hostages just to use as human shields. Like these people are they deserve destruction. Is what they deserve. These Hamas and in those groups like Hamas. Uh, Chris also asked, "Do you have a good article or short list of all the prophetic signs of the end times that is easily shareable on social media?" Yep, just go to my website. I have rules for the remnant, which is a very abbreviated list, but also I've got charts on there that kind of walk everything through that. I mean, there's plenty of resources on rev310.net. Um, I've got it on the tabs. If you go on a laptop, you can look at the web page itself, and there's tabs across the top that show graphics, charts, etc. It's all free for anybody to use. Lynette asked, "Do you any of your kids watch your lives?" Sometimes. They're curious about it. There's a couple of my lives I did. Well, no, they weren't lives. I guess they were pre-recorded. When I very first started, I was already doing interviews on YouTube with Tom Hughes and other folks, but like I didn't have my own channel at the time. And I started to pre-record videos here in my office, but my desk was over here at this time. And I made the mistake of letting my bulldog stay in here. And I'd get like an hour into it. I was talking about the Russia, Ukraine, because that had just started. And uh, my dogs just start snoring, and it became so loud that I couldn't even continue the recording because of the snoring was so loud for my bulldog. So that's why I kind of kick all the dogs out before I start doing anything. Um, but yeah, they do. Yeah, I don't care if they watch them. I let them watch anything they want. With if I'm on there, they wanted to see, but a lot of the stuff they don't fully understand right now. Um, Shannon Batson, question, Pete, do you think it's possible that the destruction of Damascus could be the hook in the jaw that brings Russia to attack Israel? I thought it would be the oil, but now I think it does. Yeah, I think so. You got to think about it from a couple of different perspectives. One, um, when the U.S. destroyed the Nord Stream pipeline and cut off Israel or Russia's cash cow to Europe, that was flowing natural gas to Germany, I think that was the first straw. The second straw is that Israel, at the same time is now they're being looked at by the EU as the alternative to Russia to be able to provide that natural gas energy to the EU via Cyprus and Greece through the pipelines. And I think that is also part of it. Uh, and then I think because of the military ties that Russia's had with both Syria and Iran, in terms of building their nuclear reactors in Iran, helping them with reverse engineering technology and stuff. The captured drone. I don't remember if you remember that American drone that was captured in Iran back, I think, when Obama was in office. It crashed over there. Taking things like that and reverse engineering it, reverse engineering all the equipment that we left in the Taliban hands in 21. Uh, the fact that the U.S. has come out so aggressively against Russia over this whole Ukraine thing, trying to alienate them, and we've really pushed them back away from the West. towards China, towards Turkey, towards other countries that have had, yeah, antagonistic uh, um, attitudes toward the United States for a while now. We pushed them all kind of to one group together. So there's that. I think that this current conflict right now, if Hezbollah does get involved, and I believe that they will, that that will also, they'll only do that because Iran gives them the green light to do that, which means now Iran is also implicated. I think Iran is already implicated in all this with Hamas, but that will just be icing on the cake there. But that'll justify them taking out Iranian nuclear reactors and their nuclear capabilities, probably doing targeted assassinations on certain leaders, up to and including the Khomeini. And then, as far as there will also probably be targeted Hamas leadership in other countries that are hiding out in other Arab countries. I see that happening as well. But I do think that this will ultimately lead to Damascus being destroyed and to the hook in the jaw for Russia. So how soon that all plays out, I don't know. I mean, I don't know how long the ground invasion will last. I assume that it will last day-to-day fighting at least for several months until they get all of that area cleared out. By then, public sentiment in the world will have turned against Israel, for the most part, and then some group will try and sue for peace, or trying to negotiate some peace deal. And I think before all this is said and done, Israel is going to take care of all her enemies in the immediate area. But I do think that that includes taking out Iran's capabilities as well. I don't think like Israel's going to bomb Tehran or anything like that. I think that they're just going to take out their nuclear capabilities in the different. I think there's 3 or 4 different places in Iran where they are building these underground facilities or have already built them and stuff. So, okay, that is all the questions I see. Oops. I think that's it. Is that it? Yeah. I can't, it's been 50 years since they declared war the last time, so I can't imagine them not using this opportunity, given how horrific everything was, to not clean the slate with all the potential threats that are still out there. They're not gonna take out Hamas just to leave Islamic Jihad or the PLO or Hezbollah or any of these other groups that are still going to be breathing down their necks out there. I think they're going to take advantage of this opportunity, and they're going to clean the slate with the threats to their borders. But when they do that, that also sets them up. I think they're going to expand their borders out of all this. I think if this goes away, that I think it does, then you could see Israel expand their borders out even further just to create buffer zones, which we see that um, going forward into Ezekiel 38, 39. So, and Kaler, too. I asked about the likelihood. I think something happens between now and the next election here to the scale of 9/11. And I think Cherry P. Um, yeah, I mean, I put it in my article, but the same administration that has been so um, lackadaisical to the southern border and the threats that all that presents, and the millions that have come over, many of whom are OTMs or other than Mexicans, um, Middle Easterns, Chinese. I mean, I would imagine we probably have about a good uh, dozen sleeper cells, if not more. There are other people out there, other teachers that don't believe this is Psalm 83, and that's okay. I mean, they can think whatever they want to think. This is just my thoughts on it. Um, I don't. I think, like, for instance, like, Lee doesn't think this is Psalm 83. Amir Tsarfati doesn't think this is Psalm 83, and that's okay. I mean, this is not something I break fellowship over. I can't see that this is so significant. I think people are underestimating how significant this is prophetically speaking. Um, I just can't see this. This is not going to be something that just is in the news one day and gone the next, and we don't hear anything about it anymore. I think this is going to be protracted and it's going to be significant. Question: 144,000 sealed Jewish males. Do they go up in the rapture? Bible doesn't say they are witnesses. That's from 44 49er fan. 40 okay, 49er fan. I won't hold that against you, 49er fan. Uh, I don't think 144,000 go up in the rapture. I think these are two different groups. Um, and it doesn't say specifically that they are witnesses. However, um, you're sealed by God. Uh, you're given this supernatural protection. What are you doing? What are you doing on the earth? Are you just hanging out? Yeah. I mean, I can't see them not being witnesses or little Pauls running around sharing the soon coming of Jesus, Messiah. Um, so I don't know. I can't see them not being that if they're empowered by the Holy Spirit to be a force inside of the tribulation time period. Let's see. All right. Pete, off topic, but what other kinds of dogs do you have? I love all animals. I've got two dogs, three guinea pigs, and two lizards. Right now, I just have eight dogs. We have a bulldog, or she's a bully, um, which is kind of a mix between a pit bull and a American bulldog. I have two long-legged Chihuahuas, and they kind of look like whippets, if you know what a whippet looks like, except for their face. And then we have two dachshunds, a long hair and a short hair. We have a schnauzer, a teacup schnauzer, and we have a normal Chihuahua. And then we have, I don't know what he is. I think he's some kind of a min pin, but I think four of the dogs are rescues. And we have a fish. We had a goldfish for like 8 years. And it was huge, and it just died not too long ago, about a year, 8 months ago, 9 months ago. Or no, it's been longer than that. I guess it's been about a year. We inherited this goldfish from somebody, and it's been with us on all these military moves. And even when we retired, we brought it here, and it finally passed about a year after or a year and a half after we got into this house. And I gave it a burial, and outside, buried a grave for it and everything. We had that fish forever, though. Uh, so that was pretty much it. I haven't allowed any other pets in the house yet because I don't. We're not ready for that craziness. Um, I want to hear a bulldog snoring. Oh man, it was so bad. I, I had to stop the video because it became so distracting to me. Um, and she could snore like, I mean, the minute she lays down, she's out, and then you could just hear it within a few minutes. Okay, I think that's it. Let's see. Trying to go back through the comments. See you, Tyler, Bima, Sir Pierce the Veil. Um, Again, all of this stuff's on the article. Between this article and the last video I did, I've shared a lot about what I think is happening now with Israel. I'm not the expert. This is just me looking at it from my perspective, background in geopolitics and Bible prophecy and all that kind of stuff. So this is just how I think it'll play out. Um, but I think this is significant, and I can't see this not turning into other things. So I want to thank everybody for being here. I will be on. I'll be on Friday with JB Hickson on his podcast. Um, Oh, I think we pre-record that. I'm not sure that I don't think he does that live. So, but I'll once that post with JB Hickson, I'll post it. And then obviously next Monday, I'll be doing another Monday live. And then again, still planning on doing Australia in February. Um, if things work out and we do this thing in Mississippi, I don't know when that would be. We haven't even really talked logistics on that or time frame. So, but that's kind of in the works there somewhere down the road. Let's see. There's another question. Peter, are we on the brink of World War III? No. I think we're on the brink of Psalm 83. We're on the brink of Isaiah 17. I think the rapture happens somewhere in that time frame. And after that, I think that Ezekiel 38, 39 happened. And then the world goes into the 70th week, kind of officially. And then that will be a world that is completely destabilized by the red horse, the rider on the red horse who takes peace from the earth. And then obviously all the judgments and things that happen. But World War III, when I think World War III, I'm thinking Armageddon, which won't happen till the end of the 70th week altogether. So let's see. If the Israeli who was saying these things is mere, we owe a little bit of grace, his people, his nations. Dude, you know what? I've read that too about Amir being overly um, nationalistic or emotional or whatever. I can't even imagine. I cannot even imagine. It's one thing for us to hear about it from across the pond over here, safe in our homes and stuff. But when this is your neighbors, your family, everybody that you know is impacted by this, and they're cutting heads off little kids, like if there's ever a time for righteous anger, I think that's it. Um, and I don't. I think that Bibi Netanyahu will probably get replaced after all this is said and done. It's still going to have fallen on his shift in terms of this attack, but I don't think he's complicit in this. I'm not saying everybody in his government is innocent. I don't know that. I don't know what they know or don't know. All I know is that I don't think he is complicit in this. Um, but we'll see. We'll see how this all shakes out. All right, guys. I think that's it. I don't really have any other information other than to say that the slides for the conferences are up on the website on their own tab. The books, if you want to get a book, One Percenters or The Disappearing New World Order, all that stuff is also on that tab, on that book. Um, you can get them through Prophecy Watchers, I think, and I think Jan Markell's. If you don't want to shop on Amazon, I totally get that. I think both Jan Markell and Prophecy Watchers carry those books. Um, encourage you to support Israel financially. The links, I'll find the links. I know Erick Stakelbeck's got some, and I know Amir Tsarfati's got. These are agencies that they trust to do right by the money that's given them. So, or the support, however that is. I plead with you guys to pray for Israel, pray for the leadership, pray for the people, pray that that people come to Jesus through all this. Pray that God can use Messianic Jews over there at a time like this, and for Christian organizations to really be a light, to shine the light of the gospel there. And pray for Amir. Yeah. Um, Guys, if you don't know the Lord Jesus Christ, if you're just here just out of curiosity or whatever, the most important decision that you could ever make in your entire life, more important than who you marry, what job you take, where you live, what you name your firstborn son, any of those things. The most important decision you ever make is, do you have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ? Because if you don't, what does the Bible say? What does it profit a man that he gain the whole world but lose his soul? Um, just like those people in Israel lost their lives in a moment. They didn't see that coming. The civilians that were living in the kibbutz and then in the parties and all that, and death came to them suddenly. None of us know um, when our last breath's going to be. So if you don't know Jesus as your Lord and Savior, um, you simply have to admit you're a sinner, admit that you can't pay for your own sins, um, recognize that Jesus' finished work on the cross is sufficient to pay for your sins, and by so doing, you get the righteousness of God applied to your life. He takes your sins and he gives you the righteousness of God, and you are covered with his blood. And when you do that, God can look at you as one of his own. And the moment you leave this world, whether it's through a heart attack, a car accident, you slip and fall, whatever the case is, or you live to see the rapture, um, that you can know with 100% certainty where you're going, because this life is a vapor. It goes by so fast. I'm almost 50, and I can tell you that my life has gone by in a blink. Um, so admit you're a sinner, believe on the Lord Jesus Christ, believe on the finished work on the cross, that what he did there was sufficient to pay for your sins. Confess your sins, call on the Lord to save you, and you will be saved. Not you might be saved, not you maybe will be saved, but you will be saved. There's passages, John 3:16, John 3:18, uh, John 14:6, Romans 10:9 through 13, Romans 3:23, Romans 6:23. I mean, passages of Ephesians 2:8 and 9. Guys, we can't earn our own salvation. We have to trust in the Lord Jesus Christ. He's the only person that's ever existed on the entire uh, history of humanity, the world, that could ever pay for sins. It was him. And because he was sinless, when he died, death could not hold him. He rose again on the third day. And so we have a living hope in our Lord Jesus Christ. And not only a living hope in that he will give us the Holy Spirit who will seal us and indwell us until the day of redemption comes, but we have a hope now in our everyday. We immediately gain access to the throne to go boldly go there and cast our cares upon the Lord, um, and and we are no longer alienated from our Creator. We are brought in as family, as sons and daughters. So Jesus is the most important thing. And if my love of Bible prophecy has taught me anything, it's only further cemented in my psyche, in my mind, that everything is happening according to the Bible. There is no, I don't have to look at the future as some dark, uh, um, uh, oblique, if that's the right word, smoky future that we can't know anything about what's going to happen tomorrow and the day after. We know that the Lord's coming back, and we know that the world, everything in the world today, is being staged and being conditioned and being prepared for that time when the Lord's going to come back and take his church to be with him, so that we'll be where he is forever. And you don't want to be here after that fact, because the world is going to enter in the worst time in human history. And Jesus said in Matthew 24 that there won't be any other time that will parallel this. It'll be the worst time in human history. You don't want to be here for that. So place your faith in the Lord Jesus Christ, and he will save you. Thank everybody for being here today. I encourage you to check out Bro Chooch, Bro Tyler, Tom Hughes, Lee Brainerd, all of the rest of the Watchmen that are out there, Erick Stakelbeck, Amir Tsarfati. Support those ministries as well. Wretched Watchmen, um, and Carol Vay, Ty Green, uh, Watchman River, all the brothers and sisters out there, uh, um, being watchmen on the wall for the Lord. Encourage and pray for those guys. Pray for us. The more that we do this, the more attacks we come under. And I can say with personal certainty that Satan has hit me hard in a lot of ways. So just pray for us, and pray for each other, pray for the community, be kind to each other, love each other. We're not all going to agree on everything. I get that. Let's show grace and kindness to each other and let the world see what kind of love we have for each other, and let that would be what distinguishes us from everybody else. So with that, I'll leave you guys. Thank you so much for coming today. I know you have better things to do than to listen to me go on and on, but I appreciate your time, and we'll look to talk to you guys next week. So God bless and Maranatha.